The twin suns of Virex bore down upon the fractured sands like celestial furnaces bleaching the landscape in a light too white to be kind. Heat shimmered off every metal edge and broken structure in the desert outpost, turning the air into a haze of vibration and warping memory. When Kale Dorn stepped out of the rust-worn transport, the scorched wind slapped against his skin with the aggression of a world that had long since decided it didn't want company. His boots sank slightly into crystallized grit as he descended the ramp carrying only a repair kit and the dull ache behind his eyes that had started the moment he accepted the contract. The instructions had been straightforward: diagnose and stabilize the failed energy nodes of Outpost Delta 17. Nothing more, nothing less. But the moment he set foot on Virex, something far older than his mission began whispering at the edges of his awareness. The outpost spread out ahead of him like a wound trying to scab over. Circular shelters patched with scavenged panels clustered around a broken plaza. Half of the buildings looked bombed out. The other half looked like they were waiting for permission. Dominion drones passed overhead in programmed arcs, their hulls stained red with dust, scanning in silent revolutions. The entire settlement felt staged too still, too observant, like the set of a long-forgotten tragedy waiting for the second act to resume. As Kale moved forward, his breath caught rhythm with the mechanical hum of the surveillance craft above. But it wasn't the drones that made his pulse rise. It was the gathering of beings ahead, an amalgamation of off-worlders, colonials, scavengers, and remnants of half-extinct species, all arranged in a circle around something at the plaza's center. He joined them almost without realizing it. His technician's coveralls marked him as harmless, and they barely spared him a glance. But as he approached, the crowd opened slightly, revealing the structure that had drawn their gaze. A cage, if one could call it that. Its bars shimmered with a light that repelled vision, humming faintly in the ultraviolet. The base on which it stood pulsed with geometric patterns carved into blackstone runes that shifted when glimpsed peripherally, never still, never fixed. It wasn't Dominion tech. It wasn't even modern. It radiated the unease of something older than conquest, older than law. Inside the cage sat a being who defied categorization. She was not just alien, she was myth coiled into physical form. Skin like emerald fire muscles, like sculpted lightning presence, like an unsheathed blade. Her posture was calm, but not passive, more like a predator preserving energy waiting for the right pulse in the wind to strike. What little she wore revealed more than it hid: straps of ceremonial armor, not for defense but tradition, and she did not look at the crowd. She looked at him. Kale did not understand how he knew that. Her eyes were closed, her breathing steady, but something in her directionality and the pull between their bodies across meters of dry air and ancient stone left no ambiguity. Her presence latched onto something dormant inside him. It was not recognition, it was something older, something cellular. The symbols beneath her cage flickered. Kale's stomach turned with nausea that felt like memory. Images flashed behind his eyes. Starfields spinning metal gauntlets, burning a scream, echoed through caverns made of crystal. None of these belonged to him, and yet they fit. The crowd had begun muttering, but Kale couldn't hear them anymore. The cage was more than a display. It was a statement, not of justice, of power, of ritual, of dominion. And the one within it was not broken. She was contained, but only for now. Without conscious decision, Kale stepped forward. One step, then another. The crowd tensed as if aware of something he was not. But their tension was background static to the current of energy now running under his feet. He reached the base of the pedestal. The air grew heavier, like atmosphere compressing before a thunderstrike. His presence alone was doing something. The runes pulsed again, then her eyes opened. Two fragments of electric sky burned into him across the void, and his knees nearly gave. Everything stopped, not literally but meaningfully. Even the drones above seemed suspended in hesitation. Kale's heartbeat thundered in his ears, louder than the murmurs of the crowd, louder than the dry wind, louder than the voice of the enforcer barking orders he did not register. The symbols beneath the cage ignited. His boot landed upon one. The pedestal lit up in a blaze of impossible geometry. Light uncoiled from the black stone in spirals and arcs that traced themselves across his body, through his chest, and into his spine like old fire remembering a path it had once traveled. His muscles locked. His vision whited out. Then silence shattered. The cage dissolved. Not shattered, not broken, dissolved. As if it had never been metal, as if it had always been waiting for this signal. Its bars melted into light and fled the air, leaving only the woman, No, the Pradara rising from her seated pose with the silence of a storm on the verge of birth. The crowd screamed. The enforcer's weapon came up. The air snapped into chaos. But all Kale could see was her movement, fluid, predatory, unrelenting, and the fact that she was walking straight toward him. The heat from the stone still radiated through his boots. The glow from the pedestal still swam behind his eyelids. His body refused to move, yet his blood burned like it remembered war. Her presence washed over him like thunder without sound. And then she was close, closer than instinct allowed. Her energy kissed his skin like living electricity. Not pain, something else, something intimate. A call and a response where both halves of the signal had been waiting for the other to exist. When she touched him, the world ignited. The flames that hadn't yet reached the surface began their slow climb through Kael's nerves, awakening something too precise to be instinct and too ancient to be memory. As the world lurched around him, voices raised in confusion. Dominion soldiers closing in with sidearms, unholstered. Surveillance drones angling for clean firing lines. He moved not by conscious decision, but through inevitability. His body responded not to fear, but to recognition. The female no. The Arathi had closed the distance with the grace of a desert cat, silent and searing. Her bioluminescent skin flared in pulses matching the beat of the pedestal runes, and Kael felt them, both her and the stone, synchronizing to something inside him. Then came the pull, a visceral torque behind his sternum like some buried engine roaring to life. By the time the first energy bolt cracked through the air, his hand had closed around hers. They ran, not because they planned to, because the world had shifted, and anything less than forward momentum would have meant immolation. The plasma blast struck the pedestal behind them, fracturing the ancient structure into shards of red-hot stone and light. Kael didn't remember how his legs carried him past the drones through the narrow alleyways, over the steel platforms behind the hab blocks. The terrain blurred rusted stairs, narrow drops, makeshift railings, discarded wires, until the world opened up and they were alone again under Virex's sky. Only then did the contact break, but the bond did not. It remained, threaded through his nervous system like glass filaments humming with her presence. Every breath felt dual, every pulse translated as shared. She watched him unreadable, then turned and walked ahead. The signal was clear. Follow. They traversed the wastelands beyond the outpost, reaching the canyons where Dominion patrols didn't go, and communications failed. The land broke open like old skin, revealing sun-split gorges and collapsed mineral mines that reeked of ozone and history. When night came, they did not speak. She led him to a crevice carved by time and wind, a shelter of fused stone layered with forgotten script. Inside, crystalline formations pulsed with faint light, resonating with the mark that now seared against Kael's chest. The runes from the pedestal had not left him. They had embedded into his skin lines of pale silver, tracing over his heart, glowing softly beneath the fabric of his coveralls. They were not decorative. They were alive, reacting to proximity, reacting to her. As he collapsed against the cave wall, trying to piece himself back together, she knelt by one of the crystals and placed her hand against it. The response was immediate. The room brightened. A humming, low and harmonic, reverberated through the floor and through his bones. This place was not random. It was a site, a sacred one, and it was waking up. Kael understood the sequence before it began, though no one had explained it. Some neural echo whispered guidance he should not have possessed. The crystalline matrix responded to their combined presence, configuring platforms from the stone, projecting holographic maps of nervous systems over the walls. Each image bore dual silhouettes intertwined, human and Arathi, in fusion, in resonance. He approached the center. The structure recognized him. A column rose from the floor, its top surface etched with alien script. Light spilled from its edges. Embedded in the column was a small basin filled with semi-viscous bioluminescent fluid. A choice. She had already begun the sequence. Her body knelt beside the structure arms, open, posture formal. Not pleading, inviting. Her breath was steady, but her skin was vibrating in pulses. The markings along her collarbone glowed in sync with Kael's chest. This was no healing chamber. It was a soul-binding interface, older than the Dominion. Older than the war, older perhaps than memory itself. He understood now what had happened. The cage in the plaza had not been a prison. It had been a bride trap, one of the oldest rituals of the Arathi Pradara bloodlines. A method of invoking ancestral link between bodies, between minds. between warriors, but it required consent not by voice but by resonance. By triggering the pedestal's ancient matrix, Kale had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking, and now the ritual demanded completion. He pressed his hand into the fluid. Heat, electric, and cellular tore through him, not pain, not pleasure, but complete invasion. The mark on his chest ignited, flaring through his back and limbs. Neurons reorganized, sensory clusters rewired, perception folded inwards. She rose and mirrored him. Their hands met. The bond locked. He didn't remember falling. The ground caught him sideways as waves of sensation crashed down, foreign memories bleeding into his consciousness like floodwater through cracked hull plating. He saw through her eyes, a canyon floor, plasma raining down from above, smoke rising from charred metal, a figure with human shoulders burning with light, him covering her retreat. He remembered the scream, her scream, the moment of detonation, his failure to die, and then emptiness. Surgical tables, memory extraction, reassignment. Kale had never been a technician. He had once been a sentinel, a warrior bred to bond with interface-class weapons, capable of integrating with alien systems on a neurological level. The Solarian Dominion had erased that history, but not entirely. Neural blocks had failed to eliminate what the body remembered. The ritual now reawakened it all. The pulse between them stabilized, breathing patterns synchronized. The crystalline formations glowed in tandem with their chests. They had become one system, and with that fusion came another wave. Not memory, but desire. Not erotic, elemental. The compulsion to survive, to act as one, to defend what had just been made. Kale's thoughts moved in strange cadence, his yet not. Her instincts filtered through his awareness, his logic refracted through her hunger. A shared focus emerged like a beacon in a sandstorm. They were no longer strangers, no longer separate. A new entity had been born, and the galaxy would have to answer for it. Dawn broke over the canyons of Virex like molten gold poured across fractured stone. Dust particles danced in shafts of light that filtered through the collapsed roof of the ancient mining complex, casting the interior in a cathedral glow. Beneath the rusted archways and shattered pylons, something old stirred, less a creature, more a union. The fusion of human and Yarathi had not completed, but its pulse now beat through every square meter of the facility. Kale Dorn lay motionless on a makeshift slab of crystal, his chest rising with disciplined breath. Bioluminescent lines still pulsed faintly beneath the skin above his heart. Each flare synchronized with the cave's walls as if he had become part of the structure itself. Neural convergence, though not yet finished, had passed its first phase. His body was beginning to adapt. His mind, however, was stretched across the void of dual consciousness. Nearby, Sayela Urin knelt amid a lattice of energy that shimmered around her like a living diagram. She had not slept. Her body required less rest, and her thoughts had never left the ritual. She could feel the link deepening. Every hour brought Kale further from what he had been and closer to something only she could understand. The old ways whispered approval. The stone remembered this bond, this rite, this resonance. At the second hour of dawn, Kale stirred. His movement was instinctive, smooth, and precise, nothing like the man who had descended from the transport days ago. When his feet met the ground, they landed silently. When his fingers brushed the cave wall, the crystals responded. His senses were sharper. He heard Sayla's heartbeat before he saw her face. He smelled the shift in her pheromones as she turned. He tasted the ionic charge in the air. But it wasn't clarity. It was duality. Two minds occupied one space. Thoughts passed between them like breath through a shared lung. Not conversation, not telepathy, integration. The next phase demanded proximity. The cave understood, as did the bond. Platforms rearranged themselves without mechanical force, guided by ancient command matrices built on emotional frequency and bioelectric permission. A central node rose from the floor, a smooth pedestal with a single indentation shaped to fit two intertwined palms. They approached in synchrony. No instruction, no hesitation. Their hands met in the center of the stone. A surge of energy detonated through their joined bodies, collapsing Kael's knees and forcing Sayla to stabilize him. The contact had shifted, no longer symbolic. The link was now physiological. Nerve endings began to mirror. Hormonal responses began to balance. Even heartbeat modulation attempted alignment. It wasn't beautiful, it was brutal. Every system fought to remain itself. Every synapse resisted sharing. But the bond, ancient and exacting, allowed no division. Kael gasped as his spinal column lit up with borrowed sensory input. He felt Sayela's awareness flowing through his own like floodwater in branching rivers. Muscle memory was no longer isolated. He could sense her combat instincts like software updates downloading into his bones. But something deeper occurred. His cellular structure, long dormant since the days of the Sentinels, responded to Sayela's presence like a sleeping weapon remembering war. Tactical overlays lit up behind his eyes, threat detection fields, kinetic path predictions, energy displacement arcs. These had been part of him once. They returned not with violence, but with recognition. The system that had been stripped from him was reawakening. And it was changing. No longer a tool of human warfare, it began incorporating Urathi inputs, her bioelectric capacity, her ambient field projection, her emotion-triggered molecular signaling. The result was not additive, it was transformative. When he stood again, Kael was no longer a man carrying two heritages. He was a synthesis. The mining complex responded. Control panels, long dead, began pulsing with light. Machinery sealed for centuries rebooted. Defense turrets rose from hidden sockets but did not target. They scanned and stood down. The place had been dormant, not broken, waiting for resonance strong enough to awaken it. Outside Dominion forces advanced. They had been tracking the energy surges from orbit. Satellite arrays flagged the location. Atmospheric interference had masked Kael and Sayela's escape, but the pulses now radiating from the mining complex were unmistakable. 3 strike teams deployed with orders to neutralize. The cave responded again, this time with violence. Long-forgotten access points collapsed inward, sealing them in. Vents redirected airflow to filter out toxins. The structure went to war readiness. So did Kael and Sayela. They moved without words. Their actions mirrored each other, not through imitation, but alignment. She armed herself from a hidden cache embedded in the cave floor. He didn't reach for weapons, he was one. His palms crackled with residual energy, and when he flexed his fingers, arcs of plasma followed. They climbed together toward the surface. Above, Dominion soldiers deployed with professional precision, fanning out across the craggy ridge. They did not expect resistance. They expected a kill order. When the cave's entrance opened like a mouth giving birth to lightning, they hesitated. The first volley didn't give them time to regret it. Kael absorbed the initial blast of plasma rounds with a flick of his wrist, his body humming with resonance. The field around him twisted the incoming shots, not reflecting but rewriting energy, becoming matter, matter becoming vapor. Sayela closed the distance in 3 strides, her limbs a blur of biomechanical force. Blades hidden in her skin extended with fluid grace-carving arcs that danced through armor and left silence in their wake. The fight didn't last. It wasn't a battle, it was an emergence. What had once been prey had become predator. Not one, not two, but a singular convergence wearing flesh. The last soldier tried to run. He didn't make it to the edge. When the noise faded, the ridge was silent but for the wind. Kael stood amid scorched stone, breathing not in exhaustion, but in calibration. His system had adjusted. Sayela's presence in his mind no longer felt foreign. It felt necessary. The third phase of the bond had completed. One more chamber remained, one final alignment, and the countdown had begun. Beneath the remains of the shattered canyon complex, within a hollowed fusion of crystalline bedrock and buried sentinel tech, the final convergence chamber stirred. Its pulse was older than language, older than Dominion records, perhaps older than the concept of war itself. Every surface within its core gleamed with residual resonance, a lattice of luminous sigils carved by will-not tools markings that shifted with the emotional frequency of those who stood within. Kael Dorn descended into its center like a man being remembered by the world. His steps no longer faltered. His breath no longer hesitated. The layers of suppression that had once shackled his nervous system, layers imposed through chemical sedation, memory interference, and identity rewriting, had eroded under pressure. What remained was both less than a man and more than one. The Sentinel protocols had returned, but they no longer spoke only with his voice. They spoke with theirs. Sayela Yurin followed, not behind but beside. Her presence no longer felt external. Her rhythms had bled into Kael's spinal feedback, and his field harmonized with hers unconsciously. Their aura of merged resonance was visible now, a shared corona of heat and magnetism, electric threads twisting between them like solar flares kissing across space. This was not intimacy. This was configuration. The chamber accepted them without fanfare. No lights blazed. No defenses rose. The system understood them as authorized by pattern recognition alone. Two organisms whose bond frequency matched parameters not accessed in centuries. A threshold had been crossed. The system opened. At the core of the chamber was a construct older than the Dominion's calendar, two spires of obsidian alloy suspended in a fluidic energy sheath that refracted light into spirals. Between them hung a sphere of stabilized plasma, cradled by magnetic resonance and humming like a living heartbeat. This was the bridge, not to elsewhere, to fusion. They stepped into the field together. Immediately pain became architecture. KL's vision shattered into code. Not numbers, but symbolic logic. Flashes of orbital patterns, forgotten battle sequences, and crystalline language structures pouring through his cognition like a secondary nervous system. He dropped to one knee, but not in submission, in recalibration. His implants, long dormant, awoke with the hunger of exiled predators, returned to their ecosystem. Sayla knelt opposite, her form arched not from agony, but from deep transformation. Her skin refracted the field's energy like conductive mesh, her internal organs rewriting themselves to accommodate the pressure of synchronization. The resonance pathways etched into her bones vibrated with harmonic precision, sending signals into Kael's system, as if daring him to match her depth. He did. Together they inhaled. The plasmasphere descended. It hovered between them, then passed directly through their merged fields. It did not burn. It reconfigured. Kael's perception extended. He no longer felt walls, only vectors. No longer felt muscles, only interface. He could sense every drone within 50 kilometers, every Dominion signal bouncing between low-orbit relays. He could taste the ignition core of their nearest orbital platform, its frequency, its fear. Through Sayla, he felt everything else. She gave him access to instinct honed through generations of genetic memory. The raw information of movement, limb trajectories, silent footwork, the subroutines of predatory posture. The battlefield was no longer topography. It was anatomy. And they were no longer players. They were pulse and purpose. Their hands met at the center of the field. This time there was no ritual, no hesitation. The bond fused. What began as neural synchronization completed into full system convergence. Cells altered. DNA spiraled together in a new equation. Nerve fibers branched into dual pathways. The sentinel implants modified their coding structures to accommodate Urathi biochemistry. The field around them flared, then contracted, snapping into a tight shell of light. When it vanished, they stood as one. No name yet existed for what they had become, and there was no time to invent one. Outside, the Dominion descended. The first dreadnought entered low orbit, its underside bristling with particle cannons and lance batteries capable of cracking the mountain apart. From the fractured hills to the southeast came the sound of approaching walkers, bipedal assault units armed for siege. Overhead, the signal of an orbital bombardment sequence aligned with their coordinates. But no part of Kael flinched. No part of Sayla hesitated. The convergence had made that impossible. They rose to the surface together, not walking, but lifted by the resonance field like debris in magnetic stasis. When they emerged into daylight, they were bathed in dust and power. The ground beneath their feet crackled with energy. The air warped in concentric waves, distorting perception as if the world couldn't decide which version of reality to display. Targeting arrays locked onto their position. Tactical overlays activated within Kael's retina. Every Dominion war machine presented itself with clear vectors, distance, angle, heat signature, weapon calibration. But none of it mattered. The convergence chamber had not simply merged their minds. It had rewritten the battlefield. Kael extended his hand. The plasmasphere reformed, spinning into a point above his palm. With a gesture, he redirected its core downward into the earth. The world buckled. The strike that followed didn't explode. It removed. Everything within the bombardment radius ceased to exist, not vaporized, not charred, but deconstructed at the quantum level. Armor became dust. Circuits became silence. The Dominion's first strike was answered with an absence their science couldn't comprehend. From orbit, the command relays panicked. They saw two life forms standing in a column of light, generating energy fields that defied containment metrics. No known weapon could replicate the effect. No known pair could survive it. They weren't just surviving. They were calling. The second dreadnought repositioned, but it was too late. Kale and Sayla's convergence had reached orbital resonance. A second pulse emitted this one vertical spiraling like a beacon into the upper atmosphere. Every Dominion vessel received it simultaneously. The message was not language. It was potential, and it was final. Far above Virex in the silent geometry of low orbit, the Dominion fleet assembled in aggressive formation. 12 dreadnoughts formed a loose perimeter, their hulls bristling with weapons designed not to conquer, but to end. Flanking them, auxiliary cruisers unspooled signal jammers and hardened scanning arrays, probing the storm of data erupting from the surface. None of it made sense. The readings below broke every model. The fusion signature from the canyon floor didn't match any known energy curve. Not biological, not technological, and not magical in the forbidden sense that Dominion science refused to acknowledge but quietly feared. Sensors fed back corrupted values, light bending at the wrong angles, particles behaving like intentions instead of mass. The High Admiral aboard the command dreadnought issued a single-order override to all capital ships. Orbital Firestorm Protocol. Sterilize the region. Down below, the desert turned golden under early morning haze. Kale Dorn stood at the highest ridge, the dust lifting around his boots, as energy crackled at the edge of his skin. His arms no longer felt separate from the storm. Every heartbeat ran parallel, with the terrain syncing with tectonic vibrations, like they were extensions of his limbs. Beside him, Sayla Yurine observed the sky without tension. Her eyes glowed from within. She did not see the threat. She saw the test. They were not alone anymore, not in any meaningful sense. Since the final fusion, every breath exchange between them carried both thought and instinct. Kale no longer asked her questions. He simply knew what she intended. Her presence nested within his cognition like a secondary core processor, and his inside hers like a steady metronome. Together, they didn't form strategy. They became it. The first orbital lance discharged. Its beam cut atmosphere like a god's scalpel slicing a path toward the mountain. Kale lifted a hand. The lance unraveled mid-descent. Particles spread like pollen, glimmering harmlessly into sunlight, recoded at the quantum level by their shared resonance. Not deflected, redirected, rewritten at the root of existence. The fleet hesitated. Weapons rearmed. Systems recalibrated. A second barrage followed, coordinated, overwhelming, mathematically assured. 5 beams each with destructive force calibrated to vaporize a dreadnought's shield in one impact. Sayla extended her hand this time. The beams curved in real space. Light bent backward. Energy twisted around them like they were gravity wells in humanoid form, each shot consumed by a spiral field that spun the power into nothing. The ground remained untouched. Not even a scorched pebble remained to mark the attempt. The Dominion did not fire again. Not yet. From the deck of the command dreadnought, emergency signals pulsed. Fleet-wide encryption channels filled with one question repeated under varying identifiers. What are they? No response returned. Only the warning echoed back. From a singular open broadcast channel not Dominion-coded. You are observing the failure of your era. No voice attached. No signature. Just presence. Kale and Sayla rose from the ridge without engines, without propulsion. The convergence field enveloped them completely now, responding to will-not physics. Their bodies became conduits, not merely standing atop the mountain, but becoming the fulcrum of it. Every implant in Kael's body surged to maximum output. Every Urathi gland within Sayla activated spilling bioluminescent markers into the air. They burned with blue fire visible from orbit, a corona of life and death, orbiting 2 cores in unison. Then came the signal. It wasn't a weapon, it was a rewrite. The resonance wave burst outward from their position in every direction, a sphere expanding at the speed of cognition, not light. It wasn't electromagnetic. It wasn't kinetic. It was interpretive. Every machine, every drone, every synthetic system caught in the wave hesitated. Their logic cores stuttered. Dominion algorithms desynchronized. AI combat programs failed their confidence thresholds. Weapons powered down. Dreadnought reactors slowed. Cruisers stopped in place. In orbit, the Dominion fleet died without damage. Not one shot fired. Not one hull cracked. But every system failed. Kale and Sayla hovered above the now silent mountain, backlit by a sky no longer screaming. They had won not through force, but through asymmetry. By becoming something the Dominion had no term for. The fusion had transcended classification. Not Sentinel, not Pradara, not man and woman. Something after. They descended only when the ships above had begun retreating, and still no army chased them. In the silence that followed, the world listened. 1 year later, the canyons of Virex had transformed. No longer a place of exile, the mountain had become a beacon. From across the systems, emissaries arrived not with treaties, but with questions. Humans, Irathi, other species with names still unpronounceable to either, all drawn to the anomaly that had severed the Dominion's certainty in one silent moment of shared breath. No authority ruled here, only potential. At the center of it all stood the fusion no longer hidden. Kaeldorn and Sayla Yrin still marked, still burning. Their convergence had not faded. If anything, it had deepened. And in the garden beside the cliffside sanctum, 2 children played under alien suns. Their laughter cut through the air like music in a language not yet written. One bore eyes of silver and veins that shimmered in darkness. The other could command insects from 100 meters away without raising her voice. Their existence was not accidental. It was the consequence of a decision made under fire. The living proof that resonance could replace dominance. And that war, when met with convergence, could give way to something far more dangerous. Unity. The citadel above this canyon had no walls, no gates, and no sentries. It required none. Those who approached did so with intention, and those who came with violence found their weapons dulled before they could raise them. The resonance field that surrounded the enclave functioned as more than defense. It was memory woven into atmosphere, a living aura of protection, generated not by machinery, but by fusion. Kaeldorn walked its paths as if they were neurons in his own mind. His every step was mirrored in subtle changes throughout the environment, a flicker in the lightstone veins of the walkway, a hum in the crystalline lattice above, a shift in air pressure that tuned itself to his respiration. He had long since stopped noticing the adjustments. The enclave was him, as he was now part of it. Beside him, Sayla Yrin moved with equal comfort. Her presence no longer registered as separate. Where he left thought unspoken, she completed the implication. Where she stirred an intent, he enacted it without translation. Their bond had surpassed even the deepest neural synchronizations once imagined by the Sentinel Order. The convergence had proven enduring and adaptive. The children too had changed. In the months that followed the fleet's retreat, the twin daughters of resonance grew quickly. Not in the accelerated biological sense, but in awareness. Their minds danced through frequencies as naturally as breathing. Their games with the local wildlife took place in silence, each gesture layered with meaning. Kael only partially understood. Their bloodlines, Sentinel and Pradara, had not merely combined. They had become multiplicative. The Dominion had not returned, not with soldiers, but with emissaries. Kael met them at the outer perimeter, where the sand still bore faint lines from the orbital firestorm that never landed. The emissaries brought no flags, no documents, only questions cloaked in protocol. They wanted definitions, designations. They wanted to know what he and Sayla had become, not who they were. No answer was provided. Only a demonstration, a simple display of synchronization walking through the world without leaving it unchanged. Lifting weather patterns from wind alone. Bending gravitational fluctuations around a child's dream. It was not violence, it was proof. And the Dominion, at least the part that survived on structure and fear, understood what came next. They withdrew again, quietly, not in surrender, but in awareness. The future had outgrown their reach. As the second year unfolded, the Convergence Enclave became more than sanctuary. It became a threshold. Beings from worlds forgotten and newly discovered began arriving. Each carried with them a fragment. Some had ancient rituals echoing the soulbind rites, others bore implants compatible with now dormant Sentinel tech. All sought resonance. Few found it, but those who did stayed. A new culture took root, not a nation, not a species, but a principle. A way of thinking that did not separate mind and purpose. Where fusion was not an aberration but evolution. Where the space between identities was treated as potential, not boundary. Kael sometimes stood above the garden terraces at dusk, watching the sun split around the cliff face, its twin shadows falling in opposite directions. He would place a hand over the mark on his chest, not glowing now, but still warm, and feel the entire mountain thrum in response. He no longer needed memory to remember who he had been. He carried all of his lives with him. The technician, the sentinel, the weapon, and now the father. Behind him, Sayla would often emerge barefoot, her steps silent on the stone. She had never needed to announce her presence. The convergence left no room for surprise. Her eyes, still sharp with predatory grace, would soften in these moments. She too had changed. Her ferocity, though undimmed, had refined. No longer driven by survival or vengeance, it now carried direction. A deliberate power. In the quiet between stars, they had chosen not to flee, not to conquer, but to build. One evening, as the daughters played among the blooming crystals, each plant, a hybrid of earth and Irathi seed, Kael reached down and picked up a small device embedded in the garden's perimeter. It was old Dominion tech, long dormant, likely unearthed by the girls during play. He held it for a moment and it activated. A projection shimmered in the air, a transmission from the Dominion High Marshal, recorded during the fleet's final retreat. It contained only one line: "When convergence renders resistance obsolete, policy must become prophecy." Kael watched the hologram flicker, then fade. He placed the device back in the soil. A gust of wind swept through the canyon. Not cold, but cleansing. They had rewritten the parameters of war. They had redefined victory. And in doing so, they had created something terrifying and tender, a life that could not be categorized, only shared. The stars above twinkled with the promise of new frontiers. But Kael no longer needed to chase them. He had already found what the galaxy had forgotten. Not power, not peace, but resonance. And so ends the story of Kael Dorn and Sayla Yeren, two from distant worlds who were never meant to meet yet, whose fusion rewrote the rules of war memory and identity. What began as a prison, as a cage in the sand, became the spark that challenged an empire and birthed a new era. Their story is not about domination. It's not even about rebellion. It's about what happens when two incompatible systems, one mechanical, one biological, choose not to clash, but to converge, and in doing so become something neither side could predict. A new force, a new family, a new future. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you feel the pull of stars or the hum of something ancient in your bones, then don't forget to support this channel. Subscribe, leave a comment, and share the resonance. Because in a universe full of warships and forgotten weapons, the most dangerous power is love willingly fused with purpose. And we're just getting started.